The lights of the Varelian Royal Hall glowed with soft blue energy, casting shadows that danced like living shapes across the crystal walls. Captain Daniel Hayes stood at the center, wearing a ceremonial silver uniform he barely understood. Alien music floated through the air, strange, deep tones that vibrated in his chest, making his heart pound harder. He had fought in space battles, faced pirates, and survived deadly storms on uncharted planets. But nothing had prepared him for this. He was about to marry Liara, princess of the Varelian Star Empire, and every eye in the room was watching him. Liara entered from the far end of the hall, her dress shimmering like liquid starlight. Her deep violet skin caught the light, making her look like she had stepped out of a dream. Her silver hair flowed down her back, and her glowing eyes locked onto his. Daniel's breath caught, not because of her beauty, but because he knew what marrying her meant. It wasn't just love, it was politics. A human and a royal alien together meant peace between their worlds. But it also meant his life would never be simple again. The ceremony began. An elder Varelian priest raised a staff of glowing crystal and began to speak in the ancient language. Daniel didn't understand the words, but Liara had told him the meaning. The priest was calling on the stars of bloodline to witness their bond. Daniel thought it was poetic, but the way the crowd chanted it back gave him chills. When the vows were spoken, Liara took his hands, her fingers cool but strong. Her voice was steady as she said, "By the stars, I take you as my life-bonded mate." Daniel replied, "And I take you, Liara, as my wife." The crowd erupted in cheers, alien voices filling the vast hall with an almost electric energy. The feast that followed was unlike anything Daniel had seen. Tables stretched for hundreds of feet, filled with alien delicacies, glowing fruits, steaming crystal bowls of strange meat, and drinks that shimmered like molten metal. Daniel tried a sip of one drink, and it burned like fire before turning sweet. Liara laughed softly, leaning close. "That one is called sun's breath," she said. "It wakes the soul." Everything seemed perfect, until she asked the question. They were seated together at the head table, surrounded by nobles, diplomats, and soldiers. Liara's eyes sparkled as she leaned closer. "Daniel, how many children do you want us to have?" He smiled without thinking. "Oh, maybe one." The smile on Lyra's face froze. Her glowing eyes dimmed slightly, and the room seemed to grow quieter. "One?" She repeated slowly, as if testing the word on her tongue. "Yes," Daniel said, feeling unsure now. "Just one." "I think that's enough, right?" Liara leaned back in her seat, her expression unreadable. Around them, the conversation seemed to pause. A noble woman nearby glanced at them, her brows furrowed. From further down the table, Lyra's mother, the queen, was watching intently. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "Is that a problem?" Lyra's voice was calm, but her words were sharp. "In my culture, Daniel, one child is not just too few, it is a tragedy." He blinked. "A tragedy?" She nodded, her silver hair catching the light. "Our families are meant to grow, to strengthen the bloodline. Fewer children means weaker clans." Before he could reply, Liara stood, raising her glass. Her voice carried through the hall. "My husband and I will bring not one child into this world, but 15. The room exploded with cheers, the crowd pounding the tables, their voices echoing off the walls. Daniel's mouth fell open. 15? Did she say 15? He tried to laugh, but the sound came out strained. Lyra's hand rested on his arm, her grip firm. "We will discuss this later," she whispered with a smile that did not reach her eyes. Daniel forced himself to nod as the crowd roared their approval. Inside, his mind was spinning. 15 children? With an alien princess? On a royal space station full of strangers? This was not what he had signed up for. As the celebration went on, Daniel noticed whispers among the nobles. Some looked at him with admiration, others with a kind of hungry expectation. One older alien, his skin pale and wrinkled, leaned close as he passed by and murmured, Do not disappoint her, human. Your life depends on it. Daniel froze, the words echoing in his mind. Was it just a joke or a warning? The music grew louder, the dancing began, and the guests moved in a swirl of colors. But Daniel sat in silence, smiling when people looked his way. Inside, questions burned like fire. Why 15? Why the urgency? And what would happen if he said no? Somewhere deep inside the palace, a bell tolled softly. Lyra's hand slid into his warm now, her smile bright again. Come, husband, she said. The real celebration is about to begin. Daniel stood, but in his chest, unease coiled tighter. He didn't know it yet, but this wedding was only the beginning of a much larger game. The royal feast stretched deep into the night, the air thick with the scent of alien spices and the low hum of music that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Daniel sat at the head table beside Liara, forcing himself to smile whenever another noble approached to congratulate them. He felt like a man walking on a glass floor, afraid of the moment it might shatter beneath him. Liara was radiant, laughing with guests, her silver hair shimmering in the golden light. But every now and then, she would glance at him, not with anger, but with a sharp, calculating gaze. He knew she hadn't forgotten his one child. Comment. And the way the queen kept looking between them, his stomach tightened. A hush began to fall over the room. The music slowed, and the guests turned their eyes to Liara. Daniel didn't know what was happening until Liara rose to her feet. Lifting a crystal goblet high into the air, her voice rang out, smooth and commanding. People of the Varelian Empire, tonight we celebrate not only the union of two hearts, but the promise of a strong future. Daniel's uneasy smile froze. He could feel something coming, like a storm just beyond the horizon. Liara's eyes locked on his as she continued. My husband and I will bless our people with not one, not 2, but 15 children. The crowd erupted like an explosion. Alien hands pounded on the tables, voices roared approval, and some even chanted his name. Daniel's heart slammed in his chest. He raised his glass automatically, though his fingers trembled slightly. He wanted to correct her, to laugh it off as a joke, but the look she gave him stopped him cold. It was the look of someone who had already made the decision and was daring him to contradict her. The queen stood next to Liara, her golden robes flowing like liquid light, and placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. Such strength of will, the queen said proudly. Such love for our people. As the cheers continued, an older man in dark robes approached Daniel from behind. No one else seemed to notice him. His skin was marked with swirling patterns that seemed to shift when Daniel blinked. The man leaned close and whispered in a voice like dry wind, "Refuse her, and your bones will drift in the void." Before Daniel could react, the man melted back into the crowd, gone as if he had never been there. The music swelled again, and Liara sat back down beside him. She sipped her drink casually, as though nothing unusual had happened. Daniel leaned closer, speaking through clenched teeth. 15 children? Liara, I'm human. She interrupted with a small smile. We will speak in private, husband. The rest of the evening passed in a haze. Every time he looked up, someone new was raising a glass in his honor. The words 15 children echoed in every toast, every cheer, until they felt carved into his skull. By the time the feast ended, Daniel felt like the walls of the palace were closing in on him. When they finally left the hall, the corridors were silent and dim. Their footsteps echoed on the polished crystal floor. Daniel's voice was low, almost pleading. Liara, why 15? Why make that announcement without asking me? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she led him through a set of tall silver doors into a private chamber, lit only by a single hovering orb of light. She turned to face him, her expression softer now. In my world, she began, 1 child is weakness, 2 is survival. But 15 means destiny. Daniel frowned. Destiny? Liara nodded slowly. Our bloodline carries an ancient prophecy. The 15th child of the Varelian royal house will unite the stars, or destroy them. Daniel stared at her, unsure if she was serious or if this was some elaborate alien ritual, but the way her voice trembled on the last words told him she believed every bit of it. He rubbed a hand over his face. "And you think that's US?" Her glowing eyes didn't waver. "I know it is. Somewhere outside." A deep, distant sound echoed like a warning bell. Daniel felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He had come here for love, but now he was starting to realize something else. This marriage was not just about peace or family. It was about a prophecy, and he was trapped right in the middle of it. The next morning, Daniel woke in the royal guest chamber to the sound of soft chimes. The room was bathed in pale golden light, filtered through a window that looked out onto the endless sprawl of the space station. For a moment, he almost forgot where he was, until he saw Liara standing at the edge of the bed. Already dressed in flowing white robes, her expression was calm, but there was a shadow in her eyes. "Get dressed," she said quietly. "My mother wishes to speak with you." Daniel sat up slowly, the memory of last night rushing back. The cheers, the toast, the number 15 ringing in his ears like a drumbeat. He dressed in silence, following Liara through winding corridors lined with tall alien guards whose eyes tracked his every move. They entered the Queen's private audience chamber. It was smaller than the Grand Hall, but somehow it felt far more dangerous. The walls were carved with symbols that seemed to shimmer and shift. The Queen sat on a high seat of crystal, her long golden hair braided with strands of living light. Beside her stood an older man in ceremonial armor, his face stern and unreadable. "Human," the Queen began, her voice like a slow chime. "You have joined our royal bloodline, and with that comes duty." Daniel kept his tone polite. "I understand, Your Majesty." But she raised a hand to silence him. "For centuries, the Varelian throne has been guarded by an ancient agreement." She gestured to the armored man, who stepped forward holding a long, narrow case. When he opened it, Daniel saw a scroll. Not paper, but thin sheets of glowing crystal. The Queen's voice grew lower. "This is the Bloodline Accord, written before our people could even travel between stars." Liara moved closer, her hand brushing Daniel's. "It says the royal family must produce 15 heirs to keep the stars in balance." Daniel's jaw tightened. 15. Always 15. The Queen's gaze hardened. "Yes, and failure to do so breaks the accord. When that happens, the other houses will have the right to challenge us, take our power, and destroy those tied to our line." Daniel felt a cold weight in his chest. "So this isn't just tradition," he said slowly. "It's survival." The Queen leaned forward, her golden eyes sharp. "More than survival, the prophecy tied to the accord says the 15th child will carry the voice of the stars, able to command fleets across galaxies." Daniel glanced at Liara. "And you think that's worth the risk of bringing so many children into a dangerous universe?" Liara's voice was steady, but he saw her fingers tremble slightly. "It's not just worth it, Daniel. It's necessary." The Queen rose from her throne and walked toward him. "Do you know why we chose you, human?" she asked, her tone almost gentle. Daniel hesitated. "Because I love your daughter?" She smiled faintly, but there was no warmth in it. "Because your human blood carries resilience no Varelian has. Your children will inherit that, making them unstoppable." Daniel didn't know whether to feel honored or trapped. The Queen placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch strangely cold. "You are now bound by the accord. Daniel Hayes, the survival of the Varelian Star Empire rests in your hands." Before he could answer, the armored man closed the case with a sharp click. The Queen turned away, dismissing them with a single word: "Prepare." As they left the chamber, Daniel leaned close to Liara, his voice low. "You knew about all this before we married." She didn't meet his eyes. "I had to be sure you wouldn't run." They walked in silence until the corridor opened into a balcony that overlooked the swirling blue clouds of a nearby gas giant. Daniel gripped the railing, staring at the storms below. 15 children, a prophecy, an ancient law, and enemies waiting for them to fail. He wasn't sure if he was ready for this. But one thing was clear. Walking away was no longer an option. Somewhere deep in the station, a distant alarm began to sound. Lyra's eyes flickered toward the noise, her jaw tightening. "Daniel," she said softly, "I think our enemies already know about the accord." Asterisk. The alarm's echo followed Daniel and Lyra through the winding corridors. It was not the kind of sound meant for drills or ceremonies. It had a sharp, urgent rhythm, like a warning heartbeat. Guards in silver armor moved quickly past them, their weapons glowing faintly as they disappeared into side passages. Daniel felt his pace quicken. "What's going on?" he asked. Lyra didn't answer right away. Instead, she pressed her palm to a wall panel, and a section of the crystal corridor slid open, revealing a narrow, hidden path. "Inside," she said firmly, pushing him through before following and sealing the wall behind them. The passage was dim and cold, lit only by thin strips of blue light. "This is one of the private escape routes," she explained in a low voice, "used by the royal family if the palace is attacked." Daniel's heart tightened. "So we are under attack?" Lyra nodded once, her expression grim. "And it's because of you." Her words hit him like a punch. "What do you mean, because of me?" Lyra's glowing eyes held his. "The moment you married me, you became the key to the prophecy. And our enemies would rather destroy you now than face 15 of our children later." They reached a hidden chamber deep within the station's core. Holographic displays flickered to life, showing the outer defense ring under heavy assault. Dark, angular ships surrounded the palace district, their weapons hammering at the shields. Daniel had seen warships before, but these were different. They moved like predators, slow and patient. Circling before striking again, a voice came through the cum. Harsh and metallic. "Royal line, surrender the human, and we will leave your world in peace." Daniel felt his stomach drop. This wasn't just an attack, it was a hunt. "They know exactly why I'm here," he muttered. Lyra's jaw tightened. "And they will never have you." She turned to a weapons rack along the wall. Pulling down a sleek alien rifle, she tossed it to Daniel, the weight unfamiliar but solid in his hands. "You may have married into a throne, but tonight you fight like a soldier," she said, her voice like steel. Before he could respond, the chamber shook violently. Dust fell from the ceiling as the hologram showed one of the enemy ships breaking through the outer shield. An urgent chime sounded, and a guard's voice came over the cum. "Your Highness, they are deploying boarding parties. They'll reach the lower corridors in minutes." Daniel's instincts from years in space combat kicked in. "How many entrances to this section?" he asked. Lyra's eyes flashed. 3, but 2 are already sealed. "The last is through the Hall of Stars." Daniel checked the rifle, feeling the strange hum of its power core. "Then we hold them there," he said, surprising even himself with the confidence in his voice. Lyra's lips curved into a small, fierce smile. "That's why I chose you," she said. They moved quickly, following the narrow passage until it opened into a long, high-ceilinged hall. The walls were lined with ancient banners from Varelian history, and the floor was polished so smooth it reflected their shapes like water. Daniel could hear the enemy before he saw them, the heavy, deliberate thud of boots and the low, mechanical hiss of their breathing. Shapes emerged at the far end of the hall, tall, armored figures with jagged masks and glowing red visors. They carried weapons that crackled with unstable energy. The leader stepped forward, voice booming through a translator. "Hand over the human, or we burn your station." Daniel's hands tightened on the rifle. Lyra stepped up beside him, her own weapon raised. "You will not touch my husband," she said, her voice echoing in the Hall of Stars. For a moment, no one moved. Then, with a roar, the enemy charged. The first shot rang out, the alien rifle kicking harder than Daniel expected. Blue light burst from the barrel, striking the lead attacker and throwing him back into the shadows. The hall erupted into chaos, weapons fire flashing against the banners. Daniel fought beside Lyra, the two moving in perfect rhythm. For every attacker that fell, More poured in, their red visors cutting through the smoke. Somewhere deep in the station, the alarm still pulsed, a reminder that this was only the beginning of the fight. And Daniel knew one thing with absolute certainty: if this was what it meant to be the human in Lyra's prophecy, he was going to have to survive every battle that came with it. The Hall of Stars was silent now, the floor littered with smoking armor plates and scorched banners. Daniel leaned against one of the great pillars, catching his breath. His hand still trembled from the fight, the alien rifle warm in his grip. Liara stood nearby, her gaze fixed on the sealed entrance where the enemy had retreated. "They will be back," she said quietly, "and in greater numbers." Daniel didn't doubt it. But before he could speak, the Queen's voice came through the cum, firm and commanding. "Return to the inner sanctum. The Council has agreed. You must begin the bloodline process immediately." Daniel frowned. "The what now?" Liara stepped toward him, her expression unreadable. "It's time for our first attempt at fulfilling the accord." They walked through a network of guarded corridors until they reached a chamber unlike any Daniel had seen. The walls pulsed faintly with light, as though the room itself was alive. In the center stood a tall cylindrical pod filled with a swirling silver liquid. Around it, alien scientists in pale robes moved quietly. Their eyes avoiding his, one of them stepped forward, holding a tablet that projected strange glowing symbols. "Human physiology," the scientist said in a flat tone, "is incompatible with pure Varelian fertility." Daniel's brow furrowed. "So, what are you saying?" Liara's voice was steady. "They will adapt you, make your body able to bond with mine on a genetic level." Daniel stared at the pod, unease coiling in his gut. What exactly does adapt mean? The scientist looked at him as if the answer was obvious. "We will rewrite parts of your DNA with biocrystal infusions. It will make you stronger, faster, and able to sire children who can survive the prophecy's trials." Daniel took a step back. "And what if I say no?" The scientist's gaze didn't waver. "Then your marriage will fail, the accord will break, and the Varelian Empire will fall." Liara moved closer, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "Daniel, I know it sounds extreme, but without this, everything we've fought for ends here." He looked into her glowing eyes, searching for any sign of hesitation. There was none. He turned back to the pod, its silver liquid swirling like a storm trapped in glass. "All right," he said, slowly, "but if this changes me too much." Liara's voice softened. "You will still be you, only stronger." Daniel stepped into the pod, the liquid rising around him, warm and strangely heavy. A low hum filled the chamber as glowing filaments of light wrapped around his body. At first, there was only heat, then pain, sharp, electric, racing through every nerve. His vision blurred, the room spinning as the hum grew louder. Through the haze, he heard Liara's voice calling his name, but it sounded far away. When the process ended, the liquid drained away. Daniel stumbled forward, gasping for breath. His skin felt different, almost charged with a faint energy. The scientist studied him with interest. "The adaptation is successful," one murmured. "But the first attempt will tell us more." Liara stepped close, touching his cheek gently. Daniel's voice was hoarse. "And if this doesn't work?" She met his gaze, her tone calm but firm. "Then we try again. And again. Until we reach 15. Before he could reply, the chamber's alarms flared again, this time sharper and faster. A guard burst through the doors, his armor scorched. "Your Highness, the enemy has breached the outer sanctum." "They are coming for the human now." Daniel's pulse spiked. There would be no quiet first attempt. The prophecy would have to wait until they survived the night. The air in the chamber shifted, thick with the vibration of approaching footsteps. Daniel could feel it, not just hear it. Every movement in the corridors outside echoed in his bones. It was the first sign that the scientists had been right. The adaptation had changed him. Liara gripped her weapon and moved to the doorway. Her voice was calm, but her eyes burned. They will be faster this time, stronger. And they will not stop. Daniel rolled his shoulders, surprised at the surge of energy in his limbs. It felt like every muscle was awake in a way it had never been before. The door shuddered under a heavy impact. Sparks burst from the edges as enemy cutting. Tools hissed through the metal. Positions, Liara ordered the guards. Daniel moved without thinking. Planting himself directly in front of the breach, one of the guards tried to push him back. "You are the target. Stay behind us." Daniel shook his head. "I'm done hiding." The door blew inward, shards of molten metal scattering across. The floor, dark armored figures surged through the opening, their weapons glowing with unstable red light. Daniel didn't hesitate. He charged. Moving faster than he thought possible, his rifle barked, each shot slamming into enemy armor with bone-jarring force. When one soldier swung a blade at him, Daniel caught the wrist mid-strike, twisting hard until the weapon clattered to the floor. The enemy leader roared, a deep, metallic sound that vibrated through the walls. He was taller than the rest, his armor reinforced with jagged plates. He moved toward Daniel with deliberate steps, as if confident this fight would end quickly. Daniel's pulse thundered, but instead of fear, there was only focus. When the leader swung, Daniel ducked low, driving the butt of his rifle into the alien's chestplate. The impact sent a crack of energy through the air, and the massive figure stumbled. Blaster fire lit the chamber in bursts of blue and red. Guards fell, enemies pushed forward, and Liara fought at Daniel's side with lethal precision. At one point, she spun behind him, firing over his shoulder at a soldier about to strike. He felt the heat of the blast pass inches from his cheek. They moved like they had trained together for years. The leader recovered and lunged again, this time grabbing Daniel by the throat. The grip was crushing, armor plates grinding into his skin. But something deep inside Daniel reacted. A surge of raw strength ripped through his body. With a shout, he tore the leader's hand away and slammed him to the ground. The impact cracking the floor beneath them, silence fell for a heartbeat. Then the surviving enemies began to retreat, dragging their wounded back through the breach. One of them looked over his shoulder and hissed in a strange language. Liara's eyes narrowed. They said, "The first child will be their last chance to stop us." Daniel's breath came fast, his hand still tingling with leftover energy. He looked around at the wreckage, the fallen guards, and the smoldering doorway. This was only one wave, and it had nearly broken them. If the prophecy was true, the real war hadn't even started yet. Liara touched his arm, her voice low but steady. "Daniel, we don't have much time. We must leave the palace before the next strike." He nodded, gripping his weapon tighter. The adaptation had made him stronger, but it had also painted a brighter target on his back. And as they moved toward the escape tunnels, Daniel realized something unsettling. He was no longer afraid of the prophecy. He was starting to feel ready for it. The escape tunnels were silent, except for the echo of their footsteps. Cold air drifted from the vents above, carrying the faint scent of burning metal from the battle they had just left. Daniel's weapon felt heavier now, not from weight, but from the choice that hung in the air. Liara walked beside him, her glowing eyes fixed forward. Neither spoke until the tunnel opened into a docking bay hidden deep beneath the palace. A single sleek starship waited, its silver hull reflecting the dim blue light. Guards loaded crates of supplies while the queen stood at the base of the ramp. Her presence filled the bay, her voice steady as she addressed Daniel. "The accord still stands, human. The prophecy is still in motion." Daniel looked around, taking in the ship, the armed escorts, and the tension in the air. "We barely survived one attack," he said quietly. "If we try to raise 15 children, they'll come after us every single day." The queen's gaze did not soften. "Yes, but each child will strengthen the empire, and each will bring us closer to the 15th. Liara turned to him. Then, her voice softer, almost pleading, "We could choose a quiet life, leave the prophecy, have one child, maybe two, live hidden, away from all this." Daniel studied her face. the way her strength wavered for just a moment. "You want that?" he asked. She hesitated. "I want you alive, Daniel. More than I want the throne." For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of the ship's engines. Daniel thought about the Accord, about the enemies who would never stop hunting them. He thought about the prophecy's warning, "Unite the stars or destroy them." And he thought about the strange, fierce fire that had woken inside him since the adaptation. Finally he stepped forward, his voice steady. "No hiding," he said. "If the 15th child decides the fate of the galaxy, then we make sure that child is ours." Lyra's eyes widened, not in fear, but in pride. The Queen nodded once. "Then you have chosen your path." As they boarded the ship, Daniel felt the weight of his choice settle over him. But there was no fear now, only purpose. He had walked into this marriage thinking he was just a man in love. Now, he was the shield between the Empire and its enemies, and the future father of 15 heirs who could change the stars. The docking bay doors began to open, revealing the vast, endless darkness of space. Somewhere out there, enemies waited. Fleets plotted, and danger gathered like storm clouds. But Daniel's grip on his weapon tightened. He looked at Liara, who placed a hand over her stomach with a small determined smile. The first of 15. He thought, and then the engines roared, carrying them into the unknown, toward a destiny that would not wait.